Well, it has been an interesting year, whether we like it or not. I mean, after 20 years of waiting, we've got finally some sense of a rainbow on terms of digitization. Of course, we have still some years to go before the consumer starts paying and reacting for that. Finally, we realized that maybe 2,000 and 3,000 boxes will not be able to tell us exactly how many people are watching global television in India, and I think that's moved in a particular direction. So we've had a fair amount of progress over the last 1 year, all of them which I think are extremely progressive principally. We've finally come across to world standards of operating and saying our advertising time needs to be restricted. Obviously, it's got some short-term impact, but in the long term, I definitely see that as a positive move for the overall industry. The movie industry has definitely flourished. You've got your 300 crore benchmarks, though I think the sweet spot is always for movie industry to be at the 500 crore with a little bit of piracy and a little bit of additional footfalls. You'll see that entire setup going forward as you go forward, and we're not too far away from that. So I think if I was being gloomy till about a couple of years ago, and I really looked at my notes and hard to actually continue to paint the gloomy picture that everyone keeps talking about, I actually found that there was a fair amount of progress. Progress because it was opening the doors and opening the gates to things that I think reflect each a pretty large opportunity. But now at the end of the day, like everywhere else, it's how we take that opportunity to the next level. Today's theme was really how we can get to $100 billion, and I'm going to get to that in a couple of minutes. But Minister Sir, I just wanted to share an anecdote with you and with the rest of the audience. About 4 weeks back, I was addressing a large gathering of about 2,000 people, which are actually social entrepreneurs, and about impact and the impact industries in India and about innovation in this country. And I was trying to exemplify that, look, in Silicon Valley and in a capitalistic economy, innovation is always from 90% to 100%, and it happens at the top end of technology. But in India, we should be very proud that we do innovation because we figured out how we're going to purify drinking water, or how do we do X or Y. And finally, we came down to impact sectors, and for all of us, the impact sectors in India is agriculture, education, health. And a 23-year-old boy in a Q&A woke up and said, "But sir, don't you think that the industry you're in is the single largest impact industry as far as India is concerned? Because you shape all our minds. All of you all sit down and actually tell us how we should think and what is our culture. If 2 of your movies and 3 of the serials on general entertainment channels talked about evangelizing agriculture, in 5 years' time, agriculture will be a sexy industry in this country. And if you decided that 2 heroes in movies and again 3 television serials, everyone starts playing football, we'll have a second national sport. So don't you think from that perspective that actually you represent the highest impact industry?" And it did take me 15 seconds almost to react to this young boy in a very short thought process that he had, for 2 reasons. One, for all of us here to gather exactly what load we're carrying on ourselves when we're talking about this industry and the impact of this industry for everybody else. And second, for us maybe to have done such a poor job to interact and work closely with the government, for them and us to jointly understand that if we actually do believe that this is an industry of impact, how do we build a blueprint that can actually make that? Because we all keep talking about the youngest nation in the world, but at the same time we know what the challenges are when we get to employment. So what is it that we can do, and what is the core respect that the government and the industry can work together with, plus the load that we have? And I thought that was an interesting one to just set the 2 days discussion in context, that while we keep looking inwards and view ourselves as we view ourselves, here was a view of someone which represented young India of how they view our industry. And I thought I just wanted to sort of share that. Back to the actual topic, I think Uday struck on the statistics. There is one more of the reports that we've just recently seen in the last 2 or 3 days, and I keep using one word, one more report with a little tinge of sarcasm, but not totally. And that sort of tells us that we're going to be at 225,000 crores by 2017. Now, first, and which is about $37 billion. I do believe we should change the $100 billion and put it in rupees, regardless of our very good-looking and dynamic Reserve Bank governor. And I think that might set us in a good stead for us to set the right targets as we go forward. But if you look at that and we look at the 18% growth, which in itself is extremely ambitious, you will find that actually we're going to get to about $55 billion by 2020. And as Uday said, it's still going to take 15 years before we can get to that. And that is that the rest of the world is constant and does not grow more than 2%. Otherwise, we're going to be back to 1% of the world market share. So if you look at that, I can't even say it's a cup half empty. I guess it's a cup that's 1% full and 99% empty, but it reflects an extremely interesting opportunity. And so I thought that if I was to share a few thoughts today, what would they be? And I had just got sort of 10 words, as short sentences, where I think could be triggers. Because to me, if we don't take 2 years, any 2 years, maybe 2015 and 2016, and the reason I'm saying that, instead of all getting enthusiastic and saying next year we should do that, because it takes 18 months to plan something, is we need 2 years. In a pragmatic sense, if I was to say, how do we get to that $100 billion? We need 2 years of changing the base of our industry. Because if we change the base and then recalibrate it 18%, we have a different chance. But there has to be 2 years, and I think that's what we've been looking for the last decade. Every year we keep thinking this is a game-changing year, and it hasn't been, because partly the rhetoric has been so high that we start believing in it and don't do anything about it, and then finally that's where the base camp we land in any case. We need a plan that over the next 18 months we plan how 2015 and 2016 could be game changers, where we correct the base of our consolidated industry. And for that I had just sort of 10 words and triggers that I just want to sort of go through, because I'm sure over the next 2 days we'll have a fair amount of discussion on all of them. Number one, dependency towards advertising. I cannot ever believe how one industry can grow when it's so absolutely linked to the growth of another industry. You're not going to be able to take and accelerate that thought process if it's so substantially dealt with a dependency that, oh, but if advertising industry doesn't grow in this country, then we can't grow in so many of our sectors. What are we actually going to do? And I think digitization, especially in broadcasting, which represents almost 50% of the M&E pie, if you look at that sector, what are we all going to collectively do to reduce that dependency on advertising is one key element. And if we don't take that white elephant in the room, and that does not mean it needs to degrow, we just have to change the dependency. Secondly is unanimity and long-term thinking. I have to, with all due respect, state that while we all come together for conferences and seminars, we're all still interested in figuring out how we're going to grow our companies, but not an industry. And we're at too nascent a stage where we actually can believe that we can report higher growth in an industry but not contribute towards an overall growth in the industry. And that requires long-term thinking and short-term thinking. Yes, 12 minutes is going to hurt broadcasters, and yes, X is going to hurt the box office, and yes, regulations in music and IPR and copyright is going to hurt the music. But if you just cut back and take an 18-month view, instead of asking for 18 months extension on everything else, you might actually find that you'll find harder solutions to a thought process. So to me, unanimity and long-term thinking was the second. The third is a question we all need to ask ourselves. Talent. How are we going to attract the best talent in India to work for the M&E sector? It's not an easy one. And I can tell you that we are not at the moment. We may be extremely charming and we have the largest profile, but our magnetism when it comes to attracting talent in this industry sucks. It is something that we have to figure out exactly what we want to do. I also do believe that today new media is going to play as much of a role as some of the conventional media that we have here today. And I'm not sure that many of our executives, founders, promoters, all of us actually have the mindset to service new media like we did with old media. You need fresh new mindset. You need a disruptive environment. None of these new media initiatives can come in an organization that does structure, that does a process and whatever else. That doesn't mean everything doesn't need to evolve. Are we really looking at new media as an extension of old media? Are we looking at new media as a separate line of business, a separate line of revenue and a separate line where actually we're going to find a completely new audience that's going to be able to attract us? And I think that is something that we need to look at. The fourth obviously is digital. Now, all of us are so in the mold of digitization, which is phenomenal, but we haven't really thought through the massive follow-up that how are we going to convert the consumer to pay? So yes, we've got them connected. Yes, we're increasing transparency. Then audit will come in, and then many other things will come in. But actually, How does it make a difference? And why is the consumer suddenly going to wake up one day? What are we doing for that, that for even the 20 million homes that have gone here, if we can show demonstration in even one model city, one model area, where this went to 100% subscription and 100% approach, where consumers started paying, forget the declaration. The declaration is a constant economic problem between DTH operators, cable operators, and the broadcaster, because the pie is so small. So somewhere down the line, somebody's going to have to split it in some unique manner. How is the consumer going to pay is something that I think we definitely need to do. Uday touched mostly on regulation, and I definitely second that. My view is, yes, in many ways, actually, we have been one of the least regulated countries in the world. And I do say that very, very categorically. At the same time, I think when we've really had a problem, it's the inconsistency necessarily, because it comes and then it goes. And I think part of our working through with the government, it would really and substantially help if we finally took a call on whatever regulations, in cable and DTH, in FDI, in copyright, in revenue subscription, and then take a 5-year commitment that we're going to stay with this. For good or for bad, this is a consistency of our regulation. We're going to take one, that's why I said we need 18 months. Figure out our regulations, put the ducks in a row, and actually then say for 5 years, we're going to stay with this regulation. How much harm can we do? In 20 years, we've changed it. It hasn't really moved the needle. So what will be the difference if we come up with something and then stay with it exactly for 5 years and for us to go forward? The sixth one is creativity and innovation. I think we substantively lack it. I second Uday that a lot of the time, because of your short-term goals, you are not thinking. If we had to introspect how much really have we done in creativity in the movie industry or in the television industry when it comes to innovation and content, it'll be this as far as I'm concerned. Genres have changed, but footfalls, you may have a movie that's done 50 crores now doing 300 crores, but let's be clear, we know what the real reasons are. High spending on marketing, no change in footfalls from Sholay to Chennai Express, very few, 10 to 15% more people coming into theaters. All we've done is increase the ticket prices, and on the weekend we increased the ticket prices to 30%. And so you're seeing a snowballing of that effect. But core, where has been the innovation in many of our aspects? Yes, reality television has now supplemented our daily soap operas. Storytelling anywhere in the world is in seasons. There's a reason for that, because there's overload on the brain, and then you stop and you pause and you look at your story and you introspect, and then you decide how the next season is going to go. But here, we're so into our short-term approach, so dependent on advertising, that we would be petrified to take a pause on a working content because of the simple reason that, oh God, how will the next replacement take as far as my financial targets are concerned? And when something's not working, you take a brutal call in 3 and 4 months. That's the ecosystem that we've all created for it, and then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I think that is something that we really need to look at. In new media, as I said already, we need people who are going to be able to think disruptively. I do not believe, and we all need to acknowledge, that people are running media companies. You need a disruptive element when it comes to new media. My biggest concern for new media today is that already we've started depending on advertising because we're taking the shortcut. We don't want to stay the course and say, we're giving you something unique, it's on a new platform, we'll wait it out, we'll incur some losses, but we want subscription revenue from consumers. So we've already started inviting the advertisers in, which is fine, but the minute you do that, to convert then to a subscription model is a nightmare. And I think we've learned that in television for 20 years, but that learning hasn't transported into new media, and I would caution that. Third last is edutainment. We're all here as people in content. We're all here having phenomenal businesses with phenomenal and powerful platforms that reach out to 600 and 800 million people. We have the content prowess. When I say edutainment, I'm not looking at curriculum. We should not be looking at that. And it's not just, again, for the 4 to 10-year-olds. Any and everybody today is hungry, whether it's for career opportunities, whether it's for upskilling. This is an industry that if you added one more content vertical, called edutainment, we would find more than a couple of $1 billion coming into that thought process. Second last is a second and third sport. We're completely dependent on one single sport. And I think it's time that the industry, because let's face it, cricket wasn't cricket till television came into the picture. It wouldn't have been cricket if television hadn't come into the picture. So if you take that, again, going back to my illustration and the anecdote of the 23-year-old, if we're an impact industry, we can actually take a 5-year view and create a second and a third sport. That in itself will be a couple of $1 billion as we look at that. And last but not the least is, I think, bandwidth. I know we've had some challenges when we've looked at the credibility of 3G in this country, but I do believe that in the next 2 years, with the investments that are being made, bandwidth will be an absolute game changer, not just for the content industry, but the way we view knowledge, the way we view education, the way we view security, but definitely for this industry, I think we're not planning enough when it comes to bandwidth. So in conclusion, a core group of 4 or 5 people on a unanimous basis that can really come together and write a 24-month plan and take a year to do that, work closely with a representative from the government so that we know stability in regulation, look at 5 focus areas which we will be evangelizing with everyone that says this is all what we need to do and contribute. If we're paying income tax and there's an education cess, is because the government wants us to know this is an important aspect of contribution from all of us. We can do the same here, not in terms of a tax, but in any form we want to do, because without that, we'll be sitting here on an incremental but not an exponential basis.